Everyone in town mocked him, just a broke janitor with a junkyard full of rusted scrap. But when he uncovered something buried for decades, the laughter turned to stunned silence. What did he find? Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The laughingstock of Cedar Ridge. The town of Cedar Ridge had always been a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Gossip traveled fast, especially when it involved someone like Ethan Caldwell, a quiet, hard-working janitor who had spent the last 20 years mopping floors at the local high school. So when word got out that he had inherited his late uncle's junkyard, the laughter started almost immediately. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who drew attention to himself. At 52, his shoulders were slightly stooped from years of labor, his hands rough and scarred from handling cleaning chemicals and broken furniture. He lived in a worn-down trailer on the edge of town, and his only company was an old mutt named Duke. The idea of him owning a junkyard, let alone turning it into something profitable, was, to most of Cedar Ridge, a joke. "Hey, Ethan," called out Roy Dawson from the auto shop, grinning as Ethan passed by on his way to work. "You find any diamonds in that scrap heap yet?" Ethan just nodded politely and kept walking. He was used to the ribbing. It had been like this ever since the will was read. His uncle, Walter Walt Caldwell, had been a recluse, a gruff old man who spent his last years surrounded by piles of rusted metal in a junkyard no one ever visited. When Ethan got the call that Walt had passed and left from the property, his first thought was that it must be some kind of mistake. They hadn't spoken in years. But the lawyer assured him it was real. The only catch? The land was mortgaged, and if Ethan didn't pay off the debts within 6 months, the bank would seize it. Now, standing in the middle of the junkyard under blazing Ohio sun, Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead and sighed. The place was a disaster. Mountains of twisted metal, broken appliances, and rotting wooden pallets stretched as far as he could see. The townspeople weren't wrong. It did look like a graveyard for garbage. But then there was the photograph. Ethan pulled it from his pocket, the edges frayed from how often he'd handled it. It showed Walt in his younger days, standing proudly in front of a row of fighter planes, his grin wide and unguarded. On the back, scribbled in faded ink, were the words, "My real fortune." Ethan didn't know much about planes, but he knew his uncle had served in the war. Was this just a sentimental keepsake? Or was there something more to it? He tucked the photo away and grabbed a shovel. If there was even a chance Walt had hidden something of value here, he had to look. Hours passed as Ethan dug through piles of debris, his muscles aching, his clothes soaked with sweat. The neighbors probably thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. But just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, his shovel struck something solid, something that didn't sound like scrap. Ethan dropped to his knees, brushing away dirt and rusted metal fragments. His fingers traced a smooth, curved edge, too precise to be random junk. His heart pounded as he dug faster, revealing more of the buried object. Then he saw it, the unmistakable shape of an aircraft wing, its metal dull by time but still intact. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just some broken-down car part. This was a plane, and not just any plane. As he cleared more of the dirt, the markings became visible, faded insignias, the outline of a cockpit, a warplane. Ethan sat back on his heels, his mind racing. How long had this been here? Why had Walt buried it? And most importantly, were there more? He barely had time to process the discovery when a voice called out from behind him. Well, looks like the janitor's playing archaeologist. Ethan turned to see Derek Boone leaning against a rusted truck frame, a smirk on his face. Derek was a local mechanic with a reputation for trouble, always looking for an easy score. "Just cleaning up," Ethan said, standing and subtly shifting to block Derek's view of the uncovered wing. Derek's eyes flicked past him, narrowing. "That's so." He took a step closer. "Because I heard rumors old Walt was into some weird stuff. You find anything interesting?" Ethan's grip tightened on the shovel. He didn't trust Derek, as far as he could throw him. "Nope," he lied. "Just junk." Derek held his gaze for a long moment before chuckling. "Sure, Caldwell. Keep telling yourself that." He turned to leave, then threw over his shoulder. "But if you do find anything valuable, well, This town's got a way of making sure things don't stay secret for long. As Derek's truck rumbled away, Ethan stared at the half-buried plane, dread settling in his stomach. He had just stumbled onto something big, and now so had Derek. The secret under the scrap. The moment Derek's taillights disappeared down the dirt road, Ethan sprang into action. He grabbed a tarp from a nearby pile of junk and threw it over the exposed wing, his hands shaking. The last thing he needed was for anyone else to see what he'd found, especially not someone like Derek Boone. The sun had fully set now, casting long shadows across the junkyard. Ethan flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as he paced around the buried plane. He needed to see more. If this really was a World War II aircraft, there was no telling how much it could be worth. And if Walt had hidden one, there might be others. Working quickly, Ethan cleared more debris, his muscles burning with effort. Piece by piece, the outline of the plane became clearer. AP-51 Mustang, its once gleaming metal now dulled by decades of dirt and rust. The cockpit was intact, the glass miraculously unbroken. Ethan ran his fingers over the faded insignia on the side, his breath coming fast. This wasn't just scrap. This was history. But as he stepped back to take it all in, his boot caught on something, a rusted metal loop sticking out of the ground. He yanked his foot free, then froze. That wasn't just a random piece of junk. It was a handle. Ethan dropped to his knees, brushing away dirt until the outline of a hatch came into view. His pulse pounded in his ears. What the hell had Walt been hiding down there? The hatch was heavy, its hinges screeching in protest as he forced it open. A rush of stale air hit his face as he pointed his flashlight into the darkness below. Wooden steps led down into what looked like an underground bunker. Ethan hesitated. This felt like something out of a movie, some secret lair buried beneath a junkyard. But curiosity won out. He took a deep breath and descended. The bunker was small but meticulously organized. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in old tools, blueprints, and stacks of yellowed notebooks. And in the center of the room, covered by a heavy canvas tarp, was a large, unmistakable shape. Ethan pulled the tarp away. Another plane. This one was smaller. A British Spitfire, its sleek frame still bearing traces of its original green paint. Unlike the Mustang outside, this one looked like it had been worked on recently. The engine compartment was open, tools still laid out as if Walt had been in the middle of repairs. Ethan's mind reeled. How had no one known about this? He turned his attention to the notebooks, flipping through the pages. Walt's handwriting was messy but legible, detailed logs of parts, repairs, and coordinates. One entry caught his eye. Asterisk, found another one today. B, 25 near the old airfield. Too far gone to salvage, but took what I could. They're still out there, waiting to be found. Asterisk, Ethan's hands trembled. This wasn't just a couple of planes. Walt had been searching for them, collecting them. A noise from above made him freeze. The creak of footsteps on the hatch. Someone was here. Ethan killed the flashlight, plunging the bunker into darkness. His heart hammered against his ribs as he listened. The footsteps moved slowly, circling the open hatch. Then a voice, Derek's. "Caldwell? You down there?" Ethan held his breath. Derek chuckled, the sound echoing down into the bunker. "I knew it. You found something, didn't you?" Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't let Derek see this. Not yet. Not until he understood what he was dealing with. He waited silent until he heard Derek's footsteps retreating. Then, after a long minute, he risked turning the flashlight back on. He had to move fast. If Derek was already suspicious, it wouldn't be long before he came back. Maybe with others. Ethan grabbed one of the notebooks and stuffed it into his jacket. Then, with one last look at the Spitfire, he climbed back up, pulling the hatch shut behind him. He had just stepped away when headlights cut through the darkness. A truck rumbled into the junkyard, stopping just feet from where he stood. The door swung open, and Derek stepped out, a smug grin on his face. "Funny," Derek said, crossing his arms, "because I could have sworn I heard something down there." Ethan forced himself to stay calm, just clearing out junk. Like I said. Derek's grin widened. "Yeah? Then you won't mind if I take a look around." Ethan's grip tightened on the shovel still in his hand. He couldn't let Derek near that hatch. But before he could respond, Duke let out a sharp bark from the trailer. The sound seemed to startle Derek, who glanced toward the noise. Ethan seized the moment. "Look, Boone, it's late. I've got work in the morning. Whatever you're looking for, it's not here." Derek studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Fine, but this isn't over." As Derek climbed back into his truck and drove off, Ethan exhaled shakily. He knew one thing for sure. He was running out of time. The collector's offer. Ethan barely slept that night. Every creak of the trailer, every distant engine sound sent him bolting upright. Convinced Derek had returned, the notebook he'd taken from a bunker lay open on his kitchen table. Its pages filled with Walt's meticulous notes, coordinates, diagrams, and scribbled observations about aircraft salvage operations spanning decades. By dawn, Ethan had made a decision. He needed help. He drove into town just as the morning sun was cresting over Cedar Ridge's sleepy Main Street. His destination? The Cedar Ridge Public Library, with a lone computer with internet access, sat tucked between shelves of dusty reference books. The librarian, Mrs. Peabody, raised an eyebrow as Ethan fumbled with the mouse. "Researching something, Mr. Caldwell?" "Just personal interest," he muttered, typing P. 51 Mustang value into the search bar. The results made his stomach flip. Rare World War II P. 51 Mustang sells for $3.5 million at auction. Fully restored Spitfire fetches record $5 million from private collector. Ethan's hands trembled as he clicked through article after article. These weren't just old planes. They were priceless pieces of history, and he had at least 2 of them buried in his junkyard. He was still staring at the screen when his phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Heard you might have something interesting in that junkyard of yours. Let's talk." D. Boone. Ethan's blood ran cold. Derek wasn't just suspicious. He was hunting. Scene, the diner showdown. Ethan sat in a corner booth at Millie's Diner, nursing a coffee he didn't taste, when the bell above the door jingled. A man in an expensive suit walked in, his Rolex glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Caldwell?" The stranger extended a manicured hand. "Harrison Cole, aviation collector." Ethan blinked. "How did you—" "Word gets around." Cole slid into the booth, his smile not reaching his eyes. Especially when someone like Derek Boone starts asking questions about World War II aircraft in junkyards. Before Ethan could respond, Cole placed a check on the table between them. $2 million. Right now, for whatever you found. The number made Ethan's vision swim. $2 million would clear Walt's debts 10 times over. He could quit his janitor job, fix up the trailer, maybe even leave Cedar Ridge forever. But something felt wrong. "That's a very specific offer," Ethan said slowly, "considering you haven't even seen the planes." Cole's smile tightened. "Let's just say I trust Boone's description, and I'm prepared to be generous to avoid a lengthy authentication process." Through the diner window, Ethan saw Derek leaning against a pickup truck across the street, watching them. Then it clicked. Cole wasn't just making an offer. He was trying to steal the discovery before Ethan realized its true value. Ethan pushed the check back. "I think I'll get them appraised first." Cole's demeanor shifted instantly. "That would be a mistake," he said softly. "These things can get complicated, dangerous even." The unspoken threat hung in the air as the collector stood to leave. "Think it over. But don't take too long. My offer expires in 24 hours. Scene, the expert's visit. That afternoon, Ethan paced the junkyard waiting for Professor Eleanor Whitmore, the World War II historian he'd frantically called from the library. A beat-up Subaru pulled in and a woman with salt and pepper hair stepped out, her eyes immediately locking onto the partially uncovered Mustang. "Oh my God," she breathed, rushing forward. "It's a D model. Look at that serial number." She turned to Ethan, her face alight. "Do you have any idea what you found?" Ethan shook his head. "This," she said, running her hand along the wing, "is one of the last surviving Mustangs from the 332nd Fighter Group. The Tuskegee Airmen flew these. There are museums that would beg for this." Ethan felt dizzy. "What's it worth?" Whitmore adjusted her glasses. "Properly restored? 4 million minimum. And if that Spitfire in your bunker is what I think it is, she whistled. You're looking at $15 million. Easy. The number hit Ethan like a physical blow. Across the yard, Duke suddenly growled. A familiar truck was idling at the gate, Derek's, and it wasn't alone. 2 other vehicles flanked it. Whitmore followed Ethan's gaze. Trouble? Ethan grabbed a crowbar from the workbench. You should go. Now. As the professor's car sped away, Derek and his friends advanced into the junkyard, tools in hand. Last chance, Caldwell, Derek called. Cole's offer still stands. Or we can take what we want. Ethan tightened his grip on the crowbar. The planes weren't just his inheritance anymore. They were his future. And he wasn't about to let anyone steal it. Standing his ground, the crunch of gravel under heavy boots echoed to the junkyard as Derek and his 2 friends fanned out, their shadows stretching long in the late afternoon sun. Ethan recognized them. Tyler, a Hulk mechanic from the next town over, and Jake, Derek's cousin, who had a reputation for trouble that made Derek look tame. Ethan's fingers tightened around the crowbar. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure they could hear it. You really think you can just walk in here and take what's mine? Ethan called out, forcing his voice steady. Derek smirked, twirling a wrench in his hand. Not taking, Caldwell. Collecting. Cole's got paperwork that says these planes belong to him. Something about your uncle owing him money. That's bullshit, Ethan snapped. Walt never owed anyone a dime. Tyler chuckled, cracking his knuckles. Guess we'll find out when we dig him up. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't fight 3 men at once. But if he backed down now, he'd lose everything. Then he remembered the notebook. Cole's lying to you, Ethan said, keeping his stance firm. You really think he'd cut you in on millions? He's using you to steal these planes before anyone finds out what they're really worth. Jake hesitated, glancing at Derek. Millions? Derek's smirk faltered for a split second before he scoffed. Don't listen to him. Cole said these are just old wrecks. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out Walt's notebook, flipping to a marked page. A fully restored P-51 Mustang sold for over $3 million last year. And that Spitfire in the bunker? Rarer, worth even more. He locked eyes with Jake. Cole's offering you pennies compared to what he'll make. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Jake lowered his pipe. Derek, is that true? Derek's face darkened. Doesn't matter. We're here to do a job. Ethan saw his opening. Or, he said slowly, you walk away right now, and when these planes sell, I cut you in fairly. No Cole. No lies. Silence stretched between them. Then Tyler spat on the ground. I ain't risking jail for a payday that might never come. He turned and lumbered back to the truck. Jake hesitated, then followed. Derek stood alone, his jaw clenched. This isn't over, he hissed. Ethan didn't lower the crowbar until Derek's truck had disappeared down the road. Then his legs gave out, and he sank onto an overturned crate, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He'd won this round. But Derek wasn't the real threat. Cole was. Seen the plan. That night, Ethan sat in his trailer with Professor Whitmore, the junkyard lit by the dim glow of a single bulb. Spread across the table were Walt's notebooks, maps, and Whitmore's hastily scribbled notes. We need to move fast, Whitmore said, tapping a photo of the Spitfire. If Cole's willing to threaten you, he won't stop at sabotage. These planes are national treasures. We can't let him get his hands on them. Ethan rubbed his temples. So what do we do? I can't just load them onto a truck. Whitmore leaned forward. I have a friend at the National World War II Museum. If we can authenticate these properly, we can get them protected as historical artifacts. That'll stop Cole or anyone else from trying to grab them. Ethan frowned. How long will that take? 3 days. Maybe less. She hesitated. But we'll need to document everything, and you'll have to guard this place until then. Ethan glanced out the window at the darkened junkyard. 3 days. Could he hold out that long? Seeing the first night watch. Ethan sat on the Mustang's wing, Duke at his feet, a shotgun across his lap. He'd never been much of a fighter, but he'd be damned if he let anyone take what was his. The hours crawled by. Crickets chirped. The wind rustled through the piles of scrap. Then, around 2 a.m., Duke's ears perked up. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Ethan stiffened. Headlights flickered in the distance, approaching slowly. Not Derek's truck. Something bigger. A van rolled to stop just outside the gate. 2 figures stepped out, silhouetted against the moonlight. Ethan cocked the shotgun. The sound echoed like a thunderclap in the silent night. The figures froze. "This is private property," Ethan called, his voice steady. "Next step you take, I start shooting." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the figures retreated to the van. The engine roared to life, and they sped away. Ethan exhaled, his hands shaking. 1 night down. 2 to go. The museum's interest. The morning sun had barely risen when a black SUV with government plates rolled into the junkyard. Ethan, who had spent the night dozing fitfully against the Mustang's fuselage, jerked awake at the sound of gravel crunching under tires. Duke let out a warning bark as 2 men in crisp button-down shirts stepped out, their eyes immediately scanning the scattered aircraft parts. "Mr. Caldwell," the older of the 2 called, flashing a badge. "I'm David Mercer, Senior Curator for the National World War II Museum. Professor Whitmore sent us." Ethan rubbed the exhaustion from his eyes and stood, still gripping the shotgun. "You got here fast." Mercer nodded grimly. "When Eleanor told us what you'd found, we chartered a flight. May we—" He gestured toward the partially uncovered Mustang. Ethan hesitated, then lowered the gun. "Watch your step. Some of this metal's sharp." The 2 men moved with the reverence of archaeologists uncovering a lost tomb. Mercer's younger associate, a restoration expert named Luis, let out a low whistle as he examined the Spitfire's engine in the bunker. "These aren't just wrecks," Luis murmured, running a gloved hand along the propeller assembly. "They're time capsules. Look at this wiring, original insulation, period-correct replacements. Your uncle wasn't just hoarding, Mr. Caldwell. He was preserving." Mercer turned to Ethan, his professional demeanor cracking with excitement. "We'd like to make you an offer. Not from a museum's acquisition fund. We couldn't begin to approach fair market value. But through our donor network, we can guarantee authenticated, tax-beneficial sale to collectors who will properly restore them." Ethan crossed his arms. "How much?" "Preliminary estimate, 12 to 15 million for the pair. Possibly more if that Corsair under the north pile is salvageable." Mercer hesitated. "There is one condition." "Here it comes," Ethan thought. "The catch. We need to document everything properly. Photographs, provenance research, authentication. Which means—" Mercer glanced at the shotgun. "We need to call the authorities about your trespassers." Ethan's stomach dropped. Involving the police meant exposing Walt's secrets and his own precarious legal claim to the junkyard. Before he could respond, Duke's sudden barking made them all turn. A news van was pulling up to the gate, its satellite dish rotating into position. "Damn it," Luis muttered. "That was fast." A sharply dressed reporter was already stepping out, microphone in hand. "Mr. Caldwell, Channel 7 News. Can you confirm you've discovered lost World War II aircraft worth millions?" Ethan shot Mercer a panicked look. The curator sighed. "And so it begins." The reporter was now climbing over the gate, her cameraman close behind. More vehicles appeared down the road. Curious neighbors, a sheriff's cruiser, and worst of all, Derek's truck lingering at the back of the growing crowd. Mercer leaned close. "Here's what's going to happen. The museum will issue a statement declaring these as historically significant finds, which should deter thieves. Meanwhile, we'll have authenticated appraisals by end of day tomorrow." He pressed a business card into Ethan's hand. "But you need to decide, fast, who you trust." As the reporter shouted questions and camera flashes lit up the Mustang's faded insignia, Ethan realized a terrible truth. The planes weren't hidden anymore, and neither was he. The whole town knows. The news van's bright lights bathed the junkyard in an unnatural glow, casting long shadows behind the piles of scrap metal. Ethan shielded his eyes as a reporter, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a practiced smile, thrust a microphone toward his face. "Mr. Caldwell, can you tell our viewers how you discovered these historic aircraft?" she asked, her voice dripping with false warmth. Ethan glanced at Mercer, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. "My uncle left me the land," Ethan said carefully. "I was cleaning it up when I found them." The reporter's eyes gleamed. "And is it true they could be worth over $15 million? Before Ethan could answer, Sheriff Dawson pushed through the growing crowd, his badge glinting under the camera lights. "All right, folks, let's give the man some space." He turned to Ethan, his expression unreadable. "Ethan, we need to talk." Mercer stepped forward smoothly. "Sheriff, these aircraft are now under the museum's purview as potential historical artifacts. Any discussions should include—" The sheriff held up a hand. "This isn't about the planes." He fixed Ethan with a hard stare. "It's about Walt's outstanding property taxes. Nearly 20 years' worth." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What?" "County records show your uncle stopped paying in 2003, the sheriff continued, loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. "With penalties, we're looking at over $300,000 owed. Until that's settled, everything on this land is technically county property." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Derek, leaning against his truck at the back, smirked. Mercer's jaw tightened. "Sheriff, surely there's some flexibility given the circumstances." "No flexibility," the sheriff interrupted. "Unless Mr. Caldwell can produce the funds by Friday, we'll have to impound these so-called artifacts for auction." He turned back to Ethan. 3 days, Caldwell. Then the county takes it all." As the sheriff walked away, the reporters swarmed like vultures, shouting questions about taxes and legal battles. Mercer guided Ethan away from the chaos, back toward the relative quiet of the bunker entrance. "This changes things," Mercer muttered, "but not necessarily for the worse. If we can get authenticated appraisals by tomorrow, we might find a donor willing to front the tax money in exchange for—" "No," Ethan cut him off. "I'm not selling to some rich collector who'll lock these planes away in a private hangar." He thought of Walt's notebooks, the years of painstaking preservation. There's got to be another way. Luis, who had been quietly examining the Spitfire's cockpit, suddenly straightened up. "There might be—" He held up a small, corroded metal plate he'd just pried from the instrument panel. "You see this serial number? This isn't just any Spitfire. It's GN Delta, the personal aircraft of Wing Commander James Fletcher, one of only 3 that survived the Battle of Britain." Mercer inhaled sharply. "That would make it—" "Priceless," Luis finished. "Museums in London and D.C. would fight over this. And under international heritage laws, certain artifacts can qualify for emergency preservation grants." A spark of hope flickered in Ethan's chest, until a shout from outside made them all freeze. "Ethan, get out here." It was Mrs. Peabody, the librarian, her voice strained with panic. Ethan rushed out of the bunker to find her pointing toward the back of the junkyard, where smoke was beginning to curl into the sky. Derek and his friends were nowhere to be seen. Ethan grabbed a fire extinguisher and ran toward the smoke, his heart pounding. As he rounded a pile of scrap, he saw it, a small blaze licking at the base of the Corsair's wing, fueled by spilled oil. Not an accident, a warning. As Ethan fought the flames, the terrible truth settled over him. The planes weren't just threatened by the government now. They were under attack. Burning bridges. The acrid smell of burnt oil clung to Ethan's clothes as he stomped out the last of the flames. His hands were black with soot, his throat raw from smoke. The fire had been small, more symbolic than destructive, but the message was clear. We can reach what's yours. Mrs. Peabody hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "I saw 3 figures running toward the old train tracks right before the smoke started," she said. "Couldn't make out who they were, but—" "Derek," Ethan finished grimly. He kicked a charred piece of debris. The Corsair's wing was scorched but intact. The fire had only grazed it. A warning shot, not a full assault. Mercer approached. His phone pressed his ear. "The museum's legal team is drafting an emergency injunction," he said as he hung up. "If we can prove these planes are irreplaceable artifacts, we might freeze the county seizure." Luis wiped grease from his hands with a rag. Problem is, we need time to authenticate everything properly. And after tonight, he gestured to the smoke still curling from the wreckage. Ethan stared at the darkened tree line where the arsonist had disappeared. His fingers curled into fists. He'd spent his life avoiding conflict, keeping his head down. But this wasn't just about him anymore. Then we moved them, he said suddenly. Mercer blinked. Moved 3 World War II aircraft? In 3 days? Not all of them. Ethan turned toward the bunker. Just the Spitfire. If it's as important as you say, we get it somewhere safe first. Luis and Mercer exchanged glances. It's possible, Luis admitted. The Spitfire is the most complete. With the right equipment, we could lift it tonight. Mercer hesitated. It's risky if the sheriff finds out. He already thinks he's won, Ethan interrupted, and Derek's made his point. They won't be watching tonight. A slow grin spread across Luis's face. I know a guy with a flatbed and a crane. Ex-military. Discreet. As they set their plan in motion, Ethan slipped away to his trailer. Beneath the floorboards was Walt's old Army footlocker. Inside, next to his uncle's dog tags, lay a rusted key and a faded map of the county, with a single location circled in red, an abandoned hangar at the old Cedar Ridge airfield. Walt had planned for this. Seen midnight operation. The junkyard was eerily quiet at 1 a.m., the only sound the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. Luis's contact, a grizzled Vietnam vet named Mac, had backed his massive flatbed truck up to the bunker entrance, its hydraulic crane already extended. Keep the lights off, Mac growled as they rigged straps around the Spitfire's fuselage. Only got one shot at this. Ethan guided the crane's hook with sweating hands as Luis directed from below. The Spitfire groaned as it lifted from its decades-old resting place, dirt cascading from its wings. Then headlights sliced through the darkness. A sheriff's cruiser rolled slowly down the access road, its spotlight sweeping the junkyard. Down! Mac hissed. They froze as the spotlight passed over them, the Spitfire suspended precariously in midair. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. If they were caught now, it wouldn't just mean losing the planes. It could mean jail time. The cruiser idled for an eternity. Then, inexplicably, it turned around and drove away. Mac let out a shaky breath. Someone up there likes you, kid. As they secured the Spitfire under a tarp, Ethan noticed something glinting in the newly exposed dirt where the plane had sat. A small metal box. He pocketed it without a word. Seen, the hangar. The old airfield was overgrown with weeds, its single runway cracked and crumbling. But the hangar, though rusted, stood solid. Ethan's hand shook as he turned Walt's key in the padlock. The door creaked open to reveal perfection. A fully equipped restoration workshop. Tools hung in meticulous rows. Shelves of parts were labeled in Walt's distinctive handwriting. And at the center, resting on wooden blocks, was the skeletal frame of another aircraft, a B-25 Mitchell bomber. Luis whistled. Your uncle wasn't a hoarder. He was a damn historian. Ethan's fingers traced the bomber's fuselage. All these years, Walt had been saving these planes, piece by piece. Not for money, for memory. He pulled the metal box from his pocket. Inside was a brittle piece of paper with Walt's unmistakable scrawl. If you're reading this, you finally understand. These birds aren't scrap. They're voices. Don't let them be silenced. Ethan swallowed hard. The sheriff's deadline. Derek's threats. Cole's greed. None of it mattered as much as this. Walt hadn't left him a junkyard. He'd left him a mission. The sheriff's gambit. The morning sun revealed fresh tire tracks circling the now-empty bunker. Ethan knelt in the dirt, running his fingers over the deep imprints. Too wide for Derek's truck. Sheriff Dawson had come looking. Inside the trailer, Mercer paced while Luis scrolled through legal documents on his laptop. The injunctions filed, Luis said, but without the Spitfire here's evidence. A heavy knock shook the door. All 3 men froze. Ethan Caldwell. Sheriff Dawson's voice carried through the thin metal. Open up. Now. Ethan exchanged glances with Mercer, who shook his head sharply. The curator mouthed, don't mention the plane as Ethan opened the door. The sheriff stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his gaze sweeping past Ethan to take in the scattered documents and Mercer's museum badge. His lips curled into a humorless smile. "Morning, gentlemen. Funny thing, drove by last night. Thought I saw something suspicious. Now I come back, and one of your precious planes is missing." Ethan kept his voice steady. "Don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff." "Cut the crap." Dawson stepped inside without invitation, his bulk filling the small space. "You think I don't know about Walt's little hideout at the airfield? The hangar's been on county radar for years." He leaned in, his breath smelling of coffee and mint. "Here's how this goes. You hand over the Spitfire by noon today, and maybe we forget about pressing theft charges." Mercer cleared his throat. "Sheriff, with all due respect, those aircraft are—" "Save it." Dawson slapped a folded paper against Ethan's chest. "New court order. All movable assets on this property, including any so-called historical artifacts, are to be surrendered to county custody immediately pending tax settlement." He turned at the door. "Noon, Caldwell, or I come back with handcuffs." As the sheriff's cruiser peeled away, Luis examined the document. "This is bullshit. The injunction should have." "Doesn't matter," Ethan interrupted. He grabbed his keys. "I need to see a lawyer. A real one. Seen the only attorney in town." Franklin Pierce's law office smelled of stale coffee and old paper. The 70-year-old attorney listened silently as Ethan laid out the situation, his gnarled fingers steepled under his chin. "Problem is," Franklin said finally, "Dawson's not wrong about the taxes. But—" He opened a dusty law book. Ohio Revised Code 5713.08 states that immovable historical artifacts on delinquent properties are exempt from seizure if deemed culturally significant by a recognized institution. He tapped the page. Key word, immovable. Mercer frowned, meaning if the planes are too big to move, then the county can't take them without special approval. Franklin grinned, revealing yellow teeth, which would take months. Ethan's mind raced. The Mustang's half buried. The Corsair's fuselage is fused to that old crane base. But the Spitfire is already safe at the hangar, Luis finished. Franklin leaned forward. "Here's what you do. Get your museum friends to declare those two plane site-specific historical monuments. Then when Dawson comes knocking, you show him the law and dare him to dig up half-ton metal birds with backhoe." Ethan exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. There was a way out. "Seen, the trap sprung." Sheriff Dawson arrived at precisely noon with 2 deputies in tow. His smirk faded when he found Ethan sitting calmly on the Mustang's wing, Mercer beside him with a notarized document in hand. "Sheriff," Mercer said smoothly, "the National World War II Museum has formally designated these aircraft as protected historical artifacts under ORC 5713.08. Any attempt to remove them constitutes destruction of cultural heritage." Dawson's face darkened. He snatched the paper, scanning it rapidly. "This doesn't cover the Spitfire." "What Spitfire?" Ethan asked innocently. The sheriff's jaw worked silently. He turned to his deputies. "Search the property. Every inch." As the deputies scattered, Dawson stepped closer to Ethan. "You're making a mistake. Cole's offer was generous. Now," he shook his head, "you'll lose everything." One of the deputies radioed in. "No sign of it, Sheriff. Just the 2 big ones." Dawson's eyes never left Ethan's. "This isn't over." As the lawmen retreated, Luis let out a triumphant whoop. Mercer clapped Ethan on the back. But Ethan's gaze was drawn to a glint of sunlight on the access road. Derek's truck parked just out of sight. And in that moment, Ethan realized the truth. The sheriff wasn't working for the county. He was working for Cole. Unearthing the truth. The moment the sheriff's cruiser disappeared down the dusty road, Ethan grabbed Mercer's arm. "We need to check the airfield. Now." Louis stayed behind to guard the junkyard while Ethan and Mercer sped toward Walt's hidden hangar in Mac's borrowed truck. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but Ethan's blood ran cold. If Dawson was working with Cole, the Spitfire wasn't safe. As they skidded to stop outside the hangar, Ethan's worst fears materialized. The padlock hung broken, the door slightly ajar. Ethan burst inside, heart pounding, then froze. The Spitfire sat untouched, gleaming under the hangar lights. But at the far end of the workshop, a figure hunched over Walt's workbench, flipping through the old notebooks. Derek Boone. Derek spun around, eyes wide. In his hands was a faded photograph Ethan hadn't seen before. Walt and a younger man standing proudly in front of the B-25 bomber, both wearing mechanics' coveralls. "You," Derek breathed, pointing at the younger man in the photo. "That's my grandfather." Ethan stepped closer, now that Derek said it. The resemblance was uncanny. Same square jaw, same defiant stance. "What?" Derek's hand shook as he shoved the photo at Ethan. They served together. After the war, they were supposed to go into business restoring planes. But Walt screwed him over. Took everything. His voice cracked. "My family lost our garage because of him." Mercer picked up another photo from the bench. Walt and Derek's grandfather shaking hands with a military officer. On the back, scribbled in Walt's handwriting, "Jake Boone, the best damn mechanic I ever knew. Lost too soon." Ethan's mind reeled. "Derek, I think you've got this backward." Derek blinked rapidly, his bravado faltering. "What do you mean?" Ethan grabbed Walt's journal from the shelf, flipping to a dog-eared page. He read aloud, "Jake's cancer came back. Doctors say 6 months. Told him I'd keep the dream alive. Save every plane we ever talked about. For him." The hangar fell silent, except for the creak of old metal. Derek sank onto a work stool, the photo slipping from his fingers. "All these years, my dad said Walt stole from us." He looked around at the meticulously preserved tools, the half-restored bomber. But he was honoring him. Mercer cleared his throat. "Son, I think your grandfather and Walt were partners. After Jake died, Walt kept their mission going alone." A truck engine roared outside. Ethan peered to the hangar's small window. Sheriff Dawson's cruiser was speeding toward them, kicking up dust. Derek stood abruptly. "I'll handle this." Before Ethan could stop him, Derek marched outside, intercepting the sheriff as he stepped from the car. Their voices carried through the open door. "Where's Caldwell?" Dawson demanded. "Gone." Derek lied smoothly. "Took the Spitfire somewhere even you can't find it." The sheriff's face turned purple. "You stupid kid. Cole paid you good money." "I don't care about Cole's money anymore." Derek crossed his arms. "And if you try to take these planes, you'll have to go through me." Dawson's hand hovered near his service weapon. "Last chance, Boone." A second engine rumbled in the distance. Luis's Subaru came barreling down the access road, followed by, impossibly, a news van. The sheriff froze. "What the hell?" Luis leapt out, camera in hand. "Sheriff Dawson, Channel 7 News. Can you comment on allegations you're conspiring with private collectors to seize historical artifacts?" Dawson backpedaled toward his cruiser. "No comment." As the sheriff peeled away, Luis grinned. "Figured we could use some publicity." Derek turned back to Ethan, his expression unreadable. "I owe you an apology. And I think I owe Walt one, too." Ethan studied the young man's face, the same stubborn pride as his grandfather in the photo. Maybe he realized this wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about making things right. Legacy takes flight. 1 month later. Ethan stood at the edge of Cedar Ridge's newly christened Caldwell Boone Aviation Heritage Site, watching his crews carefully secure the fully restored P-51 Mustang onto a specialized transport. The morning sun glinted off the plane's polished metal surface, now bearing the distinctive red tail markings of the Tuskegee Airmen, exactly as it had looked during the war. Derek wiped grease from his hands as he approached. "Museum's team says they'll have her display ready by Veterans Day." His voice carried a note of pride Ethan hadn't heard before. Ethan nodded, looking around at the transformed junkyard. What had once been a scrap heap was now a bustling preservation site. The State Historical Society had intervened after Channel 7's expose on the sheriff's corruption, securing grant money to pay off Walt's back taxes. The Corsair would remain here permanently as a centerpiece exhibit, while the Spitfire had been loaned to the British Imperial War Museum in a deal that made international headlines. Mercer walked up holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Nervous?" he asked, handing one to Ethan. "A little," Ethan admitted. He glanced at the trailer being hauled away, his home for 20 years. In its place would rise a small education center, with an apartment for the site's new full-time caretaker. Derek cleared his throat. "About that, I was thinking maybe I could take Walt's old workshop at the hangar. Keep working on the B-25. He hesitated. "If that's all right with you." Ethan studied the young man, no longer a threat, but not quite a friend. Something better. Family. "I think Walt would have liked that." As the transport truck pulled away with its priceless cargo, Ethan pulled a small box from his pocket, the last item he'd found in Walt's footlocker. Inside lay a pair of World War II-era pilot wings and a note, "For whoever carries the dream forward." He pressed it into Derek's hand. "These belong to you now." Derek's eyes shone as he clutched the wings. Nearby, Professor Whitmore directed a film crew documenting the preservation efforts, while Mac regaled reporters with exaggerated tales of their midnight rescue mission. Ethan took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. The planes were safe. The truth was out. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell wasn't just a janitor. He was part of something bigger. Ethan's journey proves that treasures aren't always about money. Sometimes they're about rediscovering our past and ourselves. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life adventures. Who knows? The next hidden treasure could be in your own backyard. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. The end.